This is a 2018 Range Rover supercharged long wheelbase, and it is the latest version of the Range Rover that was just updated for the 2018 model year. The sticker price on this one is just shy of $125,000. I remember 10 years ago you used to be able to get a Range Rover for $75,000, $80,000. Those days are long gone. This new one now starts at $88,500, and with popular options you can easily enter the $105,000, $110,000, $115,000 realm. Today, I'm going to show you why it's worth every penny. I borrowed this 2018 Range Rover from RLB Auto Group here in Fort Worth, Texas. RLB has a very cool inventory of some very recent models like this one and some cool older classics. You can check out their inventory by clicking the link in the description below. Now, like I said, the 2018 Range Rover just came out, and today I'm going to show you around it. But first, a quick overview. Now, like I mentioned, this is a Range Rover supercharged long wheelbase, which means the base price of this model starts around $110,000. And yet, this isn't even the top model in the lineup. Next up is the Autobiography, which starts at $143,000, and then there's the SV Autobiography, which starts at $179,000 and can be equipped to over $200,000. Not for a Ferrari or a Bentley or a Rolls-Royce, for a Range Rover. So today I'm going to take you on a tour of the 2018 Range Rover supercharged long wheelbase, and I'm going to show you all of the interesting quirks and cool features of a $125,000 Range Rover. Then I'm going to get it on the road and drive it, and then I'm going to give it a Doug score. And for more of my thoughts on the 2018 Range Rover, click the link below to visit autotrader.com/oversteer. I'm going to start under the hood, the engine. This is, like I mentioned before, the Range Rover Supercharged. Now, the interesting thing about that is they're all supercharged. Even the base model now has a supercharged V6, but this is the only Range Rover Supercharged. It's sort of like how there's a Porsche 911 Turbo, even though the whole Porsche 911 lineup is turbocharged. Anyway, the base model has a supercharged V6 with somewhere in the neighborhood of 350 horsepower. This thing has a supercharged 5-liter V8 with 520 horsepower. Sports car numbers in a Range Rover. Next up, now even though this is an all-new 2018 model, this is just a refresh, not a full redesign, so the exterior of this car is pretty much the same as it was. There are, however, a couple of interesting things I've noticed. One is the window trim. Now, virtually every car, sort of on the edges of the windows, has a little trim piece, just like the front windows do right here, and the back windows do at the beginning right here. That's really common, but if you walk back here and you take a look at this, you will notice there are no more trim pieces. It's just solid window until you get to here. It's like a modern skyscraper. It's all glass, and it's a really cool look. Next up, an interesting item with the wheels. Now, just like virtually every vehicle, this one has the brand name Land Rover in the middle in the center cap, but unlike most other vehicles, if you look at the valve stem caps, you will also see that it says Range Rover. Ferrari sometimes puts a horse on their valve stem caps. This car, they crammed the words Range Rover in there, just in case you forget what you're driving when you're doing a quick tire change. Next up, we got to talk about the rear lights, which are brand new for 2018 and already among my favorites in the car industry. Check this out. When you're driving along at night, the headlights are on, the rear taillights are lit up in red. That's obviously pretty standard, but check this out. Put on the turn signal and the part that was red suddenly becomes orange. It's like magic, and it looks really, really cool, you got to admit. That is a nice look that I've previously only seen on really high-end cars like Bentleys and Rolls-Royce. And I'm not done with the back because there is more interestingness back here. Check this out. This car has a camera in the back to serve as a parking camera. Obviously, all cars do now. But this car also has a rear washer. You can activate it up front. When you wash the rear window, it also washes the rear camera to prevent grime and dirt from building up on your rear camera and clouding your view when you're in reverse. That's a pretty incredible feature. Now, one of the most obvious features on the outside of the 2018 Range Rover is an updated LED light pattern that's just a little tighter and a little more angular than the previous one, but that's child's play. Us seasoned quirks and features spotters will instead turn our attention to the grille, which has this sort of interesting modern design throughout it that has the exact same pattern everywhere, except in one place, a little line that's supposed to be flat is instead egg-shaped to account for the Land Rover logo. Next up, a few other interesting items in back. Check this out. It has a power tailgate. Now that may not seem all that special to you, largely because most cars have a power tailgate, but the thing about Range Rovers is they have a clamshell. One opens up and the other one opens down. Now in the past, Land Rover said that they couldn't make a power tailgate simply because the owners want this so they can have picnics and tailgate from their Range Rovers, and that was too difficult to figure out with power operation. But they have figured it out, and check this out. You push the little button to close the power tailgate, and both items close automatically, so you don't have to do any work yourself. Next up, keeping in the cargo area, you probably saw all the stuff back here. You might be wondering, what exactly is all that? Well, it's all the stuff you get when you buy a new Range Rover. I will start with Click and Go. This is a little plastic thing that clips into the front seat headrest for the rear seat passengers to use. It's basically this universal solution where if you stick it in place, you can then use it as a base for a wide range of different items. For example, you can use it as a hook or a hanger for your clothes. That would be Click and Hook and Click and Hang. You can also attach a base to it so you can use a laptop if you're in the back seat, or you can put in an iPad holder so that your children can watch an iPad as you're driving them down the street. That's one of the items in the back here. Another one is this giant white box. That would be the cargo storage organizer. You can stick that here and it will kind of separate your cargo if you're coming home from the grocery store and you don't want stuff to roll around. You also have an all-weather rubber mat for the cargo area. You have your traditional floor mats. There's also this little Land Rover bag, which is really a lunchbox, if we're being completely honest with ourselves, but it's an interior car care kit with various cloths that you can use to wipe down your leather. And speaking of which, you also get this. This is my personal favorite item in the back. It's a little bottle and it says on it Land Rover Luxury Leather Cleaner. This isn't just regular leather cleaner, this is Land Rover Luxury Leather Cleaner. If you're gonna get a Range Rover, you can only have the finest Land Rover Luxury Leather Cleaner. But that's got nothing on what comes next. Now, in a lot of luxury SUVs, there is a button in the cargo area to lower the rear seats if you're trying to load in a big item so you don't have to go into the back seat and fumble with some latch and lower them manually, and this car has that. But in most models, you press the button and then they just sort of release themselves and fall forward. In this one, it is automatic and motorized the entire way down. Or you can push a button and it's automatic and motorized coming back up. And of course, it gives you the option to do that for the rear seat on the driver's side or the rear seat on the passenger side, or both at once. That is a pretty cool feature, but here's an even cooler one. If you're walking up to the car with something really heavy and you just can't get it over the cargo floor and it's too heavy to lift, you can push a button and lower the Range Rover from the back. Push it, and the Range Rover uses its air suspension to lower a few inches, which allows you to get that heavy item into the cargo area. Of course, when we're discussing the rear of the Range Rover long wheelbase, the cargo area is only part of the attraction. More interesting is what's in the back seat. But before I climb back there, I want you to take a look at the door situation. The rear door is absolutely massive, especially when you compare it to the front door. It's just huge. That's because to make the long wheelbase model, they didn't just stretch the front a little bit and the front doors a little bit and the cargo area a little. Instead, all of the stretching for the long wheelbase went right here into the back seats. This is the Range Rover you're supposed to have if you're being driven around by a chauffeur. Okay, climbing into the back of this car, there are a few features back here that are pretty impressive and in some cases almost surprising, starting with the rear door blind spot monitor. Yes, there's a blind spot monitor for the rear passengers. You see, these doors are so big that I guess Land Rover is worried about you opening them into traffic or taking on a bicyclist, and so there is a blind spot monitor built into the rear doors. It's right next to the rear door handle, and it lights up with a little orange triangle if there's a vehicle approaching. When the car is off and there's someone inside, you might want to get out. Just to let you know, don't open the door right now. That's a pretty impressive feature. Also impressive is this little pad next to the power window control on the rear door panel. Check this out. It looks like it's just giving you information or displaying something, but actually it's a button. At the bottom of the touchpad, you will see two different lighting options. One is for a reading light and the other is for a laptop light. They come out of the same light fixture, but they are different. The laptop one is designed to be optimized for a screen, whereas the reading one is designed to be optimized to be easy on your eyes. And you can actually tell the difference when you switch between the laptop light and the reading light. That's pretty impressive. Next up, press the next button up, and that controls the sunroof sunshade. It can open or close it using that pad. And finally, the button on top mutes or unmutes the volume in the stereo system, which is pretty cool. It's not just a power window and it's not just a display. It actually has functions. Also interesting, next to that pad and the power window switch, you will see a button with a diagram of a window on it and two arrows. That button allows you to control which window you're rolling down. If you have the arrow pointing to the right window and you drop the power window, it rolls down the one on the passenger side. Pointing to the left, it rolls down the one on the driver's side. And if you have both arrows lit up, you can roll down both back windows at once using just one power window control.
Another interesting item, you can turn on and off the reading lights without using the pad by simply tapping them, which is cool.
Next, I want to talk about how the rear storage for rear passengers is simply delivered to you. One example of this can be found in the rear center armrest. If you put the armrest down, you will see that there is a little rear storage cubby. To open it, simply push this little silver button and then the lid pops open and delivers you whatever item you have sitting in there. It's the same story with the little rear storage cubby sitting on the back of the front center console. You push the little silver button and then the lid pops open, delivering your storage to you. So you don't have to actually lift any of these lids yourself. Instead, the Range Rover will do that for you. Next up, a few other items back here that are also interesting, although these aren't quite as surprising. There is rear climate control, two separate zones, so each person sitting in each back seat can have their own temperature. The rear passengers also have the ability to heat or cool their seats. If they push these little circle buttons, they can turn it to cool or heat. The rear seat passengers can also recline their backrest, power operated of course, on the door. Of course, it also goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, in the back seat of the long wheelbase Range Rover, there's just a lot of room. The front seats are currently in a normal seating position, and I mean, look at this. I can do whatever I want back here, and I'm completely comfortable. There's a ton of space. Next up, moving on to the front seats, I'm gonna start with the front door panel, which has a little touchpad similar to the one in the back. This one, though, is even cooler. First off, it allows you to adjust the mirrors. You push the mirror you want to adjust, it lights up in orange, and then you move the little mirror joystick, and that's how you adjust the mirrors in this car. No flimsy little switch to move from mirror to mirror. A little touchpad on the driver's door also allows you to fold in the mirrors. If you push the little button below the mirror joystick, it automatically folds them in. Then move further down on the little touchpad, and to the right you will see the child lock. Push it, and then the child locks turn on for the rear seats. And finally, on the lower left, that button allows you to set a lower ride height so that when you're getting in and out of the car lowers to make it easier to get inside. All of those items are on that little touchpad, which is basically a little screen, which they have lovingly placed right next to the windows at the very top of the door panel, so that if you roll down your window and it's even misting slightly, water will get onto that little screen and damage it. I will say, though, that I have to admit, I really like the look of the power window switches. They have a really, really nice high-end vehicle look to them, not some plastic like in a lot of cars. Next up, moving further down on the door panel, Land Rover has moved the seat controls to the door panel, just like Mercedes-Benz. As you can see, there are many ways to adjust this seat. But check this out, the little switch for the adjustable thigh support bolster stays put. So as you move the bottom of the seat forward and backward, you can move that little thigh support bolster independently of the bottom part of the seat. That is a cool look. Another cool look comes when you put down the sun visor. Take a look at this. Open up the visor mirror and you aren't provided just one light to look at yourself, but rather 3 expensive looking LEDs like you're in some high-class restroom. Less appealing than that, however, is the glove box situation. This car has two glove boxes, an upper glove box and a lower glove box. The lower one is normal. You push the little button with the down pointing arrow and the lower glove box opens right up. The upper one is odd. You push the button with the up pointing arrow and the upper glove box unlatches, but when you go to open it, you'll find that it doesn't stay open. Instead, it sort of snaps back every time you get it in the open position. I guess it's trying to clamp down on anyone who's trying to take whatever you're storing in the upper glove box. Now, speaking of the glove box obviously contains the owner's manual of this car. I leafed through the owner's manual. I didn't find anything especially unusual, except on page 260, it's demonstrating how to use the touchscreen and the sound system, and the artist that they chose to use for this demonstration is Linkin Park, which is a little odd. I guess they think Linkin Park fans are buying these Range Rovers. On the very next page, it reminds you that listening to music over 85 decibels for a long period of time can be damaging to your hearing. That's something I hope they're communicating to all of the Linkin Park fans who are apparently buying these Range Rovers. Another interesting item in the gauge cluster screen is the Wiper Winter Park feature. Basically, the way this works is you select Wiper Winter Park, and then the next time you turn off the car, the wipers go up about 6 inches to prevent them from freezing to the windshield. Now, next up we move on to maybe the coolest new feature of the 2018 Range Rover, and that would be the center screen situation. For 2018, the Range Rover has adopted the latest in the Land Rover center screen technology. Now, I already showed a lot of this technology in my video review of the Range Rover Velar, which went up a couple of months ago, and I've linked that review in the description below for sort of an in-depth look. Right now, I will cover some of the highlights of the Range Rover infotainment system that you can't miss even if you don't want to watch the full Velar video.
The basic gist of the center screen is this. Rather than just one screen like before, everything in the middle is a screen. There is, for example, this screen for climate controls, and you make adjustments with these cool dials, or switch to the seating tab and you can use the dials to turn on the heated seats or the cooled seats. You can also go into the vehicle tab and change what mode you're in, which displays a nice picture of the Range Rover enjoying that mode. Meanwhile, the upper screen is used for more traditional functions like the vehicle cameras and the navigation system. Also futuristic is the steering wheel control for the gauge cluster, which actually changes based on what's on the gauge cluster screen. Did you notice that? Right now it says OK in the middle with arrows, but it can switch to control other functions depending on exactly what's shown on the gauge cluster screen.
And so those are the many features and the interesting weird quirks of the 2018 Range Rover supercharged long wheelbase. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives.
All right, driving the new Range Rover. It occurs to me I never did a review of the pre-facelift version of this model, the new Range Rover that came out in 13. So this is sort of my first of this. The screens are just insane. I mean, we've really reached peak screen here, but I really believe it's a good solution. These cars just have so much tech now that if you didn't do screens, you would just have acres and acres of buttons. And honestly, I think that would be more complicated than the screens because you'd have to make the buttons so tiny to work everything. Now having the screens, you can just sort of devote each screen to each level. You know, there's the seats and the climate and the vehicle set, you know, and the settings. And that way you don't have to worry about trying to cram all these buttons in here. And each screen, although, oh, it's screens, I don't like screens, each one can be a little bit more simple. Now, the ride quality in this vehicle is just unbelievable. Just going over little bumps, it soaks up the ride just incredibly, incredibly well. Oh, it just feels so, so nice. I don't quite feel like you have the same sort of king of the road driving feel that you have in my 06, and especially not in the old 90s ones, the Range Rover Classic. Those things just had a little bit more of sort of an occasion, more upright. This one feels a little bit more like a crossover when you're actually sitting behind the wheel. With that said, it's hard not to think that this is truly one of the great SUVs. I mean, it's so comfortable in here and it's so quiet in here, and the ride quality is so excellent. It may not quite feel as stately as an old one, but everything else is so much better than any prior Range Rover, or really any other luxury SUV short of, you know, Bentayga. If you want the best, this is the best. And it still is, and it still feels like it. And the new screens and the new tech, say what you will, but the kind of people who lease these, the kind of people who buy them and only have them for a few years until the next cool one comes out, this is the hot new thing. This is what you want. This is the coolest stuff in the car biz. Somehow Land Rover has gotten to the forefront of all this, and they're right up there with Tesla and with Volvo in terms of in-car technology. All right, now this is a supercharged Range Rover. I'm gonna have to floor it. All right, here goes. Whoa. Wow. Wow. That's impressive. I mean, it's no supercar. I'm not like blown away, but for an SUV, it's pretty quick, and it's a lot quicker than I expected it given the size. This is the long wheelbase. This is a massive vehicle that has some power. That was actually quite impressive. But then we go around a corner and I'm like, you know, body rolling like crazy. It's it certainly doesn't have a sports car sort of driving feel, but if you want to get ahead of someone, wow, that's way more power than this thing ought to have. That's aggressive. I can't even tell you how well this thing is soaking up bumps. The car I did right before this was a new Nissan Titan. And that's fine, you know. I did the nicest model. It's a pretty comfortable, luxurious vehicle. This thing feels like it's on a different planet in terms of ride comfort. I don't remember the last time I drove a car that really was that comfortable, short of the craziest level of Rolls-Royce Bentley type stuff.
And so that's the 2018 Range Rover Supercharged long wheelbase. Here's a news flash, people. The luxury sedan is dying. From 2002 to 2008, BMW averaged 18,000 sales a year of their 7 Series luxury sedan in the United States. In the last decade, they haven't cracked 13,000 once. People no longer want luxury sedans, they want luxury SUVs. And the Range Rover is the luxury SUV king. And now you can see why. Anyway, now it's time to give it a Doug score. I'm going to speed through this because the comparison at the end is really the most interesting part of the Range Rover's Doug score. Starting with the weekend categories and styling, it's nice looking and it gets a 7 out of 10. Acceleration, 0 to 60 is 4.6 seconds and that's a 6 out of 10. Handling is only okay and it gets a 4 out of 10. Cool factor is high as it's still a Range Rover and it gets a 6 out of 10. Importance is lower as they make a lot of these and it's not uniquely special and it gets a 5 out of 10, bringing the weekend score to 28 out of 50 and placing it above its closest rival that I've scored, the Lincoln Navigator. But people don't buy these vehicles for weekend driving, so moving on to the daily categories and features, with its great screens and myriad of stuff, it gets a 9 out of 10. Comfort is very good and it gets an 8 out of 10. Quality is suspect. I had a screen failure in the Velar I tested, and we all know Land Rover reliability is worrisome. On top of that, the interior materials in the Range Rover simply don't beat the Lincoln Navigator, and it gets only a 6 out of 10. Practicality, this thing is huge, but only 2 rows of seats means it gets bumped down to just a 9 out of 10. Finally, value. $125,000 is a lot of money, especially given the competition, and it gets a 5 out of 10, bringing the total daily score to 37 out of 50. Now well below the Navigator, but just below the far more expensive Bentley Bentayga. Add it all up, and the Doug score is 65 out of 100, and here's where it gets interesting with a comparison to its rivals. I personally think the Navigator is much better than the Range Rover, but the Range Rover wins overall because it has a higher weekend score. It's just much faster. Meanwhile, the Jeep Trackhawk is much faster than the Range Rover, but the Jeep doesn't come close in the daily score. The Bentayga is better in both areas, but it's $100,000 more expensive than the Range Rover, meaning when you consider everything, price, daily, and weekend, the Range Rover is probably the best luxury SUV compromise. Or just get an E63 wagon and you don't have to make any compromises at all.